The Confederates' objectives were to convince Northern Republicans to stop their persecution of the war. The Union's objectives were to defend the northern states. Their goal was to pursue General Lee's army and to stop the Confederates' advance.
On June 3, 1863, Robert E. Lee of Virginia begins campaigning. He wanted to raid Pennsylvania to relieve Virginia countryside, and he wanted to disturb Union economic security and bring recognition to the Confederacy. But Lee canceled his plans when he heard about Joseph Hooker's Union Army. Lee enters Gettysburg in late June 1863, and the battle officially begun on July 1st, when Lee's Confederate Army and George Meade's Union Army clashed in the town of Gettysburg.
Battle Day 1, July 1st, 1863. General Lee planned to assemble his army in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. However, one of the Confederate divisions under A.P. Hill approached Gettysburg in search of supplies, only to find that 2 Union cavalry brigades had arrived the previous day. Luckily, Confederate forces were able to drive the outnumbered Federal defenders back to Cemetery Hill. Lee then gave orders to attack Cemetery Hill, but the order was declined because the Federal positions were too strong. Then, Union Corps under Winfield Scott Hancock arrived in Gettysburg to extend his defensive line. 3 more Union Corps then arrived that night. Battle Day 2, July 2nd, 1863. General Lee decided that the Confederacy were to attack the Federals. Commanded by Daniel Sickles, Confederate soldiers opened fire on the Union Corps at 4 p.m. that day. There was then bloody fighting for the next several hours. Unfortunately, Sickles ended up seriously wounded. When the day finally came to an end, both armies suffered heavy losses with more than 9,000 casualties on each side.
July 3rd. Since Lee believed that all his men were on the brink of victory, he decided to send 3 divisions against the Union center. The troops were led by George Pickett, and the attack was later known as Pickett's Charge. The Union opened fire on the advancing rebels from behind the stone walls, but since the Confederates were caught off guard, less than half of them survived. Lee then scrambled back to the defensive line after the failed assault and ordered attack, but eventually failed and ended up in thousands of rebel casualties. On July 4th, Lee was forced to withdraw his battered army back toward Virginia.
Some key people in the Battle of Gettysburg were Major General Robert E. Lee, General George Meade, General John Reynolds, and President Abraham Lincoln. Major General Robert E. Lee was the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, also known as the Confederate Army. In the beginning of the Civil War, Lee rejected the invitation of being the commander of the Union Army because he wanted to stay true to his home state, Virginia. Lee won many battles before Gettysburg. In the beginning of Battle of Gettysburg, Lee reorganized his army into 3 corps, one under Longstreet, second under Richard S. Ewell, and the third under Hill. On July 1st, Lee established his headquarters at Thompson's House. Next, we have General George Meade, who was the commander of the Union force. In the beginning, General Meade was hesitant in accepting the role as the commander of the Union Army. Meade served with honor and distinction throughout the Civil War. Even though Meade had a rocky start at the beginning of his battle, he still managed to win the Battle of Gettysburg. Another key person was General John Reynolds. Reynolds was asked to be the commander of the Union Army, but declined the offer. Instead, he appointed General Meade as the commander. In response, Meade appointed Reynolds to command one wing of the Union Army. Sadly, Reynolds was killed on July 1st by a Confederate bullet and was not able to see the end of the battle. Lastly, we have President Abraham Lincoln. On November 19, 1863, President Lincoln delivered one of his famous speeches named the Gettysburg Address. He delivered this speech in the National Cemetery of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania.
The aftermath of the battle. More than 35,000 were found dead and wounded in the battle's wake. General Lee waited for a counterattack from the Union on the rainy day of July 4th, 1863, but it never happened. The battle was a crushing defeat for the Confederacy. They suffered 28,000 casualties, almost 1/3 of Lee's army. The Union suffered 23,000. The North rejoiced as the South mourned. Lee offered a resignation to the Confederate President Jefferson Davis, but it was rejected. The Battle of Gettysburg turned the tides of the Civil War in the Union's favor.